Hi everyone, Mr. Ong here. In today's lesson video, we will be starting on our new chapter, Chapter 9, Singapore's Security Challenges After Independence. For this lesson, what you will need is both access to this set of slides and also this handout. Okay, handout I1, you should see a table right in the front. You should say Introduction, Different Approaches for Military Defense, and the rest of the handout here. Okay, if you have misplaced your hard copy handout, what I would like you to do is to access your Google Classroom. I will have also uploaded a copy of I1. Now, let's jump into the lesson proper. So where are we now in the Sec 2 history syllabus, and where are we now in Singapore's history? For the past few weeks in Term 3, we've been looking at Singapore after the Japanese occupation and after we attained self-government from the British. So in 1963, we saw how Singapore gradually moved towards political independence by first merging with Malaya. We saw that there were two sets of reasons: political reasons why we merged with Malaya for independence, and economic reasons. We wanted to have access to the common market, so on and so forth. But over the course of merger, in the succeeding 2 years after 1963, we realized that there are many different events that took place, which showed a lot of tensions, a lot of political disagreements that took place between Singapore and Malaysia. Worst of all, probably were the racial riots in 1964. And that eventually led to 1965, Singapore separating from Malaysia and attaining independence. So where we are in the story is we are taking off, we're looking at Singapore after 1965, and we're looking specifically at the Singapore's security challenges. What security challenges refers to are the things that are military threats to Singapore, whether it's about terrorism, whether it's about invasion from other countries, or the threat of invasion. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to do three things. Firstly, you should be able to define what these two terms mean: deterrence and diplomacy. We'll see that later in the lesson. Secondly, I'm going to be going through a several series of security challenges that Singapore faced after independence, in different threats that we faced. And lastly, you should be able to explain how Singapore overcame these security challenges. Now, this point number 3 is what you guys are going to be working on in your group work. You guys will be looking at different parts of the Singapore's solutions, and you're going to be presenting to each other in a lesson form. Okay, so let's jump into the introduction about different approaches for military defense. Different approaches means that different countries have a different idea of how they want to defend their country. Okay, and each of it has its own pros and cons. So let's get an example. What do I mean? Okay, so an example of approach number 1, way of defending the country is to recruit a professional army. Okay, recruit a professional army. So what does a professional army mean? It means that those who are part of the army are full-time soldiers. They're not like Mr. Ong, for example. I'm a full-time teacher, but every now and then I go back to the army for some training. And in the event of war or an emergency, Mr. Ong will pause his teaching job and go to become a soldier for a while. Okay, but that's in the event of emergency. But these guys, professional army, you're full-time soldiers. Your job is to train 24/7 and be ready to respond to an emergency on the immediate notice. Okay, so because they're full-time soldiers, they're paid a full salary to defend the country militarily. So an example of a full professional army will be that of China. Okay, so right now, China is one of the largest armies in the world with 2.185 million active military personnel. Okay, that's a huge size of an army. Okay, so that's one approach, recruiting a professional army. Now, the opposite of a professional army is that of a conscript army. Now, what is the meaning of a conscript? A conscript is a person who serves or who is enlisted or who joins the army compulsorily. Okay, for a short length of time, meaning it's not that they chose to join the army, but they are supposed to serve for a certain length of time. Okay, so Singapore, our national service, is an example of a conscript army. Okay, every male above the age of 18, a Singapore citizen, has to join the army. Another country which practices conscription or national service is that of Israel. Okay, so pictured here is the Israel Defense Force, and what you should be seeing quite clearly in this picture is that the IDF, Israel Defense Force, has both male and female citizens in its army. Singapore, on the other hand, practices that we only enlist the male citizens, but if a female wants to join the army as a professional soldier, so that approach number 1, she may choose to do so. Okay, so these are two different approaches. Okay, approach number 1 is I recruit a professional army, a large army. Okay, and approach number 2 is I raise a conscript army. Okay, whether or not they want to serve, that's a different story. Okay, approach number 3 is to rely on military alliances with other countries. What's a military alliance? It's an agreement or promise between nations to defend each other in times of crisis. So pictured here is an example of the US-Japan alliance. Okay, so if Japan ever lands up in a military conflict, by this agreement, the USA is meant to or supposed to come and support Japan. Now, the question, of course, is what happens if they don't honor or they don't fulfill their promise? Now, what I've just gone through are three different approaches to defending the country. What I would like you to do is to pause the video and to think to yourself, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of these approaches? Okay, so for example, conscript army, unfortunately, one of the things that you often hear is that most people do not want to serve the army. And so probably one of the disadvantages could be they are not motivated to train. Okay, and maybe an advantage of a professional army is that because these guys are training 24/7, maybe the skills are slightly higher than that of a conscript army or volunteer army. Okay, so take some time, try to complete this table. I'll go through this when we meet back together in class. And the big idea behind this small introduction is that the approaches a country takes to defend itself militarily depends on the context of a country. So, for example, if Singapore is a very, very small country, then if we were to recruit a large professional army, then we may not have enough people to join the economic workforce, and then we might have a strong military, but our economy might suffer. Okay, so it depends on the context of your country, and it depends on the specific security challenges that you face. And so ultimately, every country adopts a mix of different approaches. Okay, no one country has a full professional army, no one country has a full conscript army, but they probably have a mixture of both conscripts and professionals. And more or less, most countries have military alliances, even if they don't depend on it entirely. Okay. Okay, so that was the introduction. Now I'm just going to jump into the first section of the lesson, which is what were the security challenges that Singapore faced after independence? Okay, after 1965, what were the major threats to our security? As I go along, there will be portions of time where I'll redirect you to watch a YouTube video. So you'll pause my video, go and YouTube the title of the other video, watch the length of time, then you come back to my video. Okay? Okay. The first major security threat, and this was something that we have already covered during the merger lesson, was that of confrontasi. Okay? Note the spelling, confrontasi with an O, not an A. So in the 1960s, Indonesia carried out attacks, okay, forgive this grammatical error. Indonesia carried out attacks against Singapore and Malaysia, and these attacks were known as confrontasi. Okay, what I want you guys to do is to pause my video, go and watch this YouTube video. Okay, the video is titled Confrontasi, Defending Our Sovereignty. Watch it from 48 seconds onwards and complete the video. Then once you're done, then you come back to my lesson video. Okay, I assume that you would have completed watching that video. So the quick summary of that video is that Indonesia, it opposed the formation of Malaysia between Singapore, Malaysia, Borneo, so on and so forth, because the president, Sukarno, he felt that this was actually a very sneaky way that Britain could continue its colonial control. Colonial control means that Britain, as the empire, would continue to control these small territories in Asia. Okay? Because of this, what Indonesia will end up doing is that it will launch attacks on Malaysia and Singapore, okay, both of these countries. You'll set off bombs in public places, you'll terrorize the population, and it's just the big idea is to disrupt life. Okay, as many as 42 bombings were carried out by Indonesian saboteurs. A saboteur is a person who carries out sabotage attacks. And the deadliest incident was then when two Indonesian soldiers set off a bomb in McDonald House in Singapore and killing 3 people, injuring 33 others, and damaging nearby buildings and cars. We saw that in the video. Now, this was the first major security threat, that of confrontasi. The second threat was that of communist terrorism. If you see the picture on the right, okay, this cap and this shirt, you should probably infer that these are military uniform. And some of you guys might recognize this from the history learning journey to the old Ford factory, okay, the former Ford factory. Okay, these were the attire that the communists wore. We must understand that the communists shifted away from organizing trade unions to launch strikes and riots, and they shifted into acts of terrorism. So while they no longer were a threat to take over the country, because people started to shift their support away from the communists, while they didn't threaten to take over the country, they committed acts of terrorism. And how do we know these are acts of terrorism? When police raided or they captured these communist groups, they found huge amount of weapons like pistols and grenades. And examples of things that they did, you can see from this picture, it's a picture of a car that has exploded, is that they committed acts of violence. So examples include killing a 7-year-old girl in Changi, exploding a bomb in Katong in 74, and even the attempted assassination of the Singapore's police commissioner in 76. Okay, so multiple examples of how the communists shifts away from trade union riots and strikes to on-right violence and terrorist attacks. And the third group of security threats will be that of international terrorism. Okay, on the 31st of January 1974, terrorists hijacked a boat called the Laju. Okay, Laju is the name of this ferry boat, and held the crew members hostage. And what they had earlier done was to attack the Shell oil refinery in Singapore to disrupt the oil supply from Singapore to South Vietnam. Okay, you'll understand why the picture of our former president S.R. Nathan is being pictured here, and this is the Laju ferry boat. Okay, so what I want you guys to do, similarly, pause my video, watch this video titled Days of Rage, Laju Hijack. Okay, it's a dramatized version of the hijacking incident, but I trust that it's pretty interesting. Okay, pretty interesting. So just go and take a pause my video, watch this video. Okay, I assume that you have completed that video. So the summary of that incident is that after several rounds of negotiation, the hijackers agreed to release the hostages in exchange for a safe passage from Singapore to Kuwait. You realize that these issues, this act of terrorism, didn't really have to do with Singapore per se, but they were carried out in Singapore. And as we go through all of these security challenges, you should think in your mind, who are the ones responsible for responding to these threats? Especially after independence, when we are no longer by right under the British and no longer under the Malaysians. Who is supposed to defend us? And if you thought that it would be the British because their military was still in Singapore, you would be wrong. Because now the fourth and the most major security threat is that the British are going to withdraw their military from Singapore. Okay, so for this, pause my video, watch this very, very old video, 1988, even older than Mr. Ong actually, this documentary. Okay, watch this video from 38 seconds onward until the 4th minute and 7 seconds. It's going to show you a little bit about the context for why the British were going to withdraw from Singapore in their military and how that would affect Singapore. Okay, so pause this video. Okay, now I assume that you have watched that video already. I thought it was pretty informative. Just a little bit of context about the British military presence in Singapore. So for the longest of times, since Singapore essentially got founded by the British in 1819, we had always been relying on the British for defense against external threats. The issue is this. Majority of the troops in Singapore came from overseas. They were foreign soldiers, and we only had a very small number of local volunteers in Singapore. This was the case from 1819 onwards, and even the case during World War II against the Japanese. The other piece of context that's important to know is that the British had stationed warships in Singapore's naval base and had created modern air base. So here's a question. If they are about to withdraw their troops and withdraw their military from Singapore, are they going to be taking away all of these supplies and resources? Okay. But why did the British want to withdraw? Aside from the fact that Singapore wanted them to get out, by the 1960s, the context is after the Second World War, Britain was in a very, very poor economic state, and he wanted to reduce its military involvement in Asia to focus on rebuilding its economy at home. Okay, it had been devastated by World War II. Okay, you can take upper sec history to find out more about this. And so in 1967, they had the shocking announcement that they're going to withdraw their defense forces from Singapore. And by 1971, majority of their forces had left, and by 76, the British had completely withdrawn from Singapore. Now, what does this mean for Singapore? What's the impact of this on Singapore? Now, if we consider against the previous security threats that Singapore has faced, against the Japanese invaders, even with 90,000 men, the British had failed to defend Singapore. And in confrontacy, forgive the spelling, the British had 50,000 men to defend themselves against Singapore. Okay? So this was how many men it took to defend against the previous security threats. Now, at the point of Singapore's independence, how many men do we have? We had 2 infantry battalions. Each of these battalions had 50 officers and about 1,000 men. So in total, 100 officers and 2,000 men to defend the entire of Singapore. And that is definitely not going to be enough because that's about what, 2,500, 2,200 people? And that is not sufficient. Okay, not enough to defend Singapore in the future. So we are moving on to section 2, Singapore's security solutions. And this is the main bulk of this will be carried out by you guys. You guys are going to be looking at the different security solutions and you're going to be teaching each other. But I'm just going to introduce you 2 terms. Okay, there are 2 broad defense strategies. A strategy is an approach or big idea for defense. Okay, the first big idea is called deterrence. What does deterrence mean? It means building a credible defense force that will make any potential enemies think twice before attacking. Credible means you can believe. Okay, so you're trying to make your enemies think that, if they are about to enter into a war with Singapore, our defense force is strong enough that would maybe cause a lot of damage to them. Okay, and as a result, they may not want to attack Singapore without serious consideration. Okay, but what happens if deterrence fails? If I fail to try to stop you from, if I fail to scare you away from attacking Singapore, well, if deterrence fails and if war actually breaks out, then this defense force, this credible defense force, must be capable of defeating the enemy very quickly and decisively. Quickly, because Singapore doesn't have enough resources to fight a very, very long war, and decisively, we must make it clear that we have defeated the enemy. Okay, so this is one idea of defense strategies. The other idea is about diplomacy. What does diplomacy mean? It means establishing and developing strong relationships with the governments and defenses around the world. Now, why would this be helpful? It's because it will allow Singapore to train with and learn from the advanced militaries elsewhere. Because at this point in time, remember, Singapore's military is very small and very undeveloped. When we learn from these advanced militaries, we have access to advanced technologies, and we also ensure that other countries will have a stake at preserving Singapore's peace and stability. What does this mean? It means that countries like Britain, countries like America would have an idea or would have some reason to want to defend Singapore. Maybe it's to defend their own factories in Singapore. Okay, so now I would like you to pause this video and try to explain what you understand by deterrence and diplomacy and write it in your handout I1. Okay, write it in your handout I1. Okay, at this point, I believe that you should have already finished watching the video. So just a recap on what is expected of you guys for your group work and what you'll be doing in class next week. Your group work is you guys are going to be creating a set of slides to teach each other about Singapore's strategies. This is going to be very similar to what we did with the War Heroes lesson at the start of the year. Okay, so the War Heroes lesson, if you recall, we looked at Elizabeth Choi, we looked at Lieutenant Anand Zaidi, we looked at Lim Bo Seng, and you guys will be teaching each other about the contributions of each of these war heroes to Singapore's defense. In the same way, this group work is meant for you guys to create a set of slides to teach each other about Singapore's strategies. So read the relevant textbook pages and conduct your own research. What I would recommend you guys do for your presentation requirements, I suggest you do up about between 6 to 8 slides, maximum 8 slides, and aim to have a maximum of 5 minutes for your presentation. Okay, so week 9, during HBL, you guys are preparing your materials, and in week 10, the moment you guys come back to class, will be starting the presentations in your groups. Okay, you might choose to use either Google Slides or Canva. Okay, forget this, maximum 5 slides, not 3 slides. Okay, 3 big prompts or 3 big guiding ideas. One is to describe what the strategy is about and to explain how this solves Singapore's security challenges. Okay, and remember, this is meant to be a presentation, so include images for illustration and fun facts to make this interesting. Okay, if you have forgotten which groups are supposed to do what, okay, here are your groups, and these are the strategies you are meant to be looking at. Okay, and for the students who are absent, I have already requested that some of your classmates include you in their groups. Okay, so your classmates should be reaching out to you to include you into the groups. Okay, and if you have forgotten who your groups are, think very hard. Remember, think back about the budget activity that we did last week. Okay, those will be the same set of groups that will carry on for this week. Okay, that'll be all for today's lesson. Thank you.